Hello, welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer for DATAVERSITY. We want to thank you for joining the latest in the monthly webinar series, Data Architecture Strategies with Donna Burbank. Today, Donna will discuss best practices in metadata management. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we'll be collecting them via the Q&A panel. And if you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely change that to network with everyone. To open the chat and the Q&A panels, you'll find those icons in the bottom middle of your screen to enable those features. And as always, we will send a follow-up email within 2 business days containing links to the slides and recording of the session and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now let me introduce to you the speaker of this monthly series, Donna Burbank. Donna is a recognized industry expert in information management with over 20 years of experience helping organizations enrich their business opportunities through data and information. She currently is the managing director of Global Data Strategy Limited, where she assists organizations around the globe in driving value from their data. And with that, let me give the floor to Donna to begin her presentation. Donna, hello and welcome.
Hello. Always a pleasure to do these webinars, and hello to everyone who's joined. Good to see some familiar names, which is always nice to see. If this is your first time, however, because it looked like some of the names were a little different this time, this is a series. And so if you've missed any of the previous sessions and any of them look interesting to you, DataVersity is very good about keeping all of these on their site recorded, so you can always go back. And then we link to those as well on our site, Global Data Strategy. So and if you're interested, next month we'll be talking about data modeling, which is kind of the cousin of metadata management, which is the topic for today. So let's dive right into that. So metadata, you will probably tell from this presentation as I go through, I am a huge fan of metadata. I've been doing metadata, almost 30 years now. And what's nice to see is that it's hotter than ever. And I think a lot of folks who like myself are in data management or data architecture or data governance, which are all kind of related. We sometimes, I don't know, sort of folks feel that those are the old-fashioned things. Well, really, they're the fundamental things. And I think what we're finding now, especially with things like AI and people wanting to be data-driven and digitally driven and all that, folks are finding that these foundations are indeed foundations, right? And we really need them more than ever. That said, things are changing, right? It's not, we don't have the same technology we did 5 years ago even, right? So how do we keep the foundations of metadata management and what kind of the core of what that means, and also apply it to these new ways of working, AI, or even just new database storage and things like that. So that's really what we'll talk through as we go through today. So this first slide here, if you didn't believe me, then you're crazy. No, I'm just kidding. If you didn't believe me, this is a survey that actually Global Data Strategy and DataVersity have partnered with, gosh, maybe 8 years now, on this ongoing survey on data management. And it was nice to see when you look at the top 10 things, when we said, this was fairly open-ended, and it is more than one before someone chimes in and say the math doesn't add up. It's multi-select, right? But what are the top things you're looking at in the coming years? And metadata is in the top 10. And it's been in the top 10 fairly consistently. What also I find interesting is also in the top 10 are some of these foundational things, right? Governance, quality, architecture, master data management, which again are kind of those cousins of metadata, as well as the things, the kind of cool and sexy and exciting things that people want to use this good data for, self-service reporting, analytics, AI, of course, data science, machine learning, et cetera, et cetera. So I think a lot of us on the call, I'm assuming, if you're the traditional DataVersity crowd that has a lot of folks that really understand this stuff, you may get this. This is also nice to maybe show to management and others that, it isn't just you saying that this is really foundational to things like AI. It's the industry, right? It's with a survey. So as we get into the use cases of metadata management, probably no surprise, these are overlapping kind of disciplines, data governance, data quality, data warehousing, BI, MDM, and then some of the benefits, right? Really, gosh, I think, a lot of us have seen this. The more you have better metadata, it is so much more efficient and agile, right? Because we know what the data means. We understand how to exchange it with other organizations and things, and it's just more efficient. And so getting that message out is really clear. And I think this is kind of an interesting slide to show some of those overlaps. Again, when we talk about overlap, so the company I work for, Global Data Strategy, probably no surprise, we do a lot of data strategy. It's in our name, and really, when I think of a data strategy or an AI strategy, we're doing a bit of those as well. To me, they're again cousins. It's really about what are we trying to do as a business, right? And then what is the tech? Kind of at that bottom is it unstructured, right? And again, we'll talk more about this, but it isn't kind of the historical day. Was this ever true? Where hey, everything's just in a nice, clean relational database. We have unstructured data. And we can talk about is it really unstructured, right? We have video files. We have audio. We have log files. We have documents now, and all of that can be harnessed even more than in the past. So how do you manage that for the different ways to consume it, both through things like BI and AI and things? But then how do you manage it in a way to integrate it, to have the right security and data asset planning and the right architecture and right? And so again, these all overlap, which is if we're careful, if we're not careful, we can confuse folks from the business that, gosh, what are you talking about? It was metadata one day and now it's master data and then it's quality and they're all related. But I think metadata, and you'll see they're kind of boxed in on the right, is core to all of these. It's hard to do governance without good metadata. It's hard to do BI without good metadata. And we'll kind of talk through this. But I think, one of the reasons we show this slide when we do any project, and not to sound like broken records, but if a company wants us to help with business intelligence, we have to look at the architecture and the data quality and the metadata of what these terms mean and everything to really make BI successful. And a lot of folks kind of like this visualization to show that it really takes a village to make your data right. And yes, you may drill down into one of these more than the other. You might all be about business intelligence, but you have to look at these others as a touch point as well. So what is metadata if you aren't familiar with metadata? So I think if you have been in the industry, but I'm sure you've heard this term data about data, but please don't use it. I can't stand that. It's just this is not the most effective way. It's sort of cute, but again, I think it is one of these things that turns off kind of non-technical people. It's like, great, you took a geeky word like metadata and you made it even more confusing. What the heck does data about data mean? I don't want to give us too much of a hard time. Again, I am a fan of metadata. I just think it has an unfortunate name, right? Because it just is complicated. That said, a lot of things have unfortunate names, and I was gonna give some examples, but I won't. And we just get used to using them, right? I was at a party years ago, and I had a friend. And if anyone's heard my webinars before, I am a self-proclaimed geek, and I'm proud of it. But I am a geek. And I was at a party, and one of my friends, who's a photographer, was actually talking about metadata. I was like, "Whoa! Did you just use the word metadata? What do you mean by that? What's your definition?" And no surprise, I kind of freaked her out. And she's like, "Well, it's the information about the photos." I'm like, but why did you call it metadata? And she's like, because that's the word. Like so maybe I'm overthinking of it, that the word is complicated with a lot of other words we use that are complicated. But I prefer to really just do it and do examples of it, and then it makes more sense. Or I think once people see metadata, they understand it or ask for it. It's really data in context, right? It's you have data, but if you don't understand the meaning and where it comes from and the lineage and the how it's stored, that's that context around data. So call it whatever you wish. This is one way I often describe it. Yet another way I describe it is kind of the Zachman framework of metadata, right? Which is the who, what, where, why, when, and how. And again, I steal from people all the time. Not steal. I love, well, from my clients. They actually had one of my clients. I was giving a presentation. He's like, the most powerful words in the English language are, for example. And I really dug into that because I think lots of times we can talk all day about it, but giving some examples of what we mean, and we'll go as we go through, we'll show some examples of metadata. But even that, like, what do you mean metadata? Like, oh, who created it? Right? And who's managing it as a steward? And what is the business definition? And are there rules? And what's the privacy level? And where is it stored? And the one I like the best, because I think we don't often think about this enough. Why? Why are we storing the data? And we do a lot of data governance in our practice too, and you get business users together and we're looking at it like, why are we even storing this data for 37 years? Do we need to? Is that a risk? Is that a benefit? Really good business conversations around asking each of these questions around your data, and that when has to do with that history. Is it great that we have 37 years of data, or is that a risk that this could be outdated? And really, when was this last updated? And are we aware of that? And then how, which is, like, I think a lot of us technical people in the call kind of think about metadata. What's the data type and things like that? How is it stored? And it's all the above. Depending on the use case, you may dig into one area more than the other. It could be the business view of it. It could be the technical view, but it really is all the above when we talk about metadata. maybe just an example, if again, metadata goes beyond relational style tables and columns of metadata, but I do think, this is like a spreadsheet. I think we can all kind of relate to this example, so I use it. But just to be clear, the data is the fact that Joe Smith is the person's name and the company. I mean, I guess there's some metadata missing even here. Does Joe Smith work for Computers R Us? Did he buy a product from Computers R Us? Does he live in New York City? Does he buy the product in New York City? Right. But at least we have some metadata, knowing that Joe's first name, Smith is last name. There's a city, the year purchased, right? That could have just said year. We didn't know, is that his birthday? Is that the year he bought something? Is that year he died? We don't know, right? So that's really getting into some of that context. I put this in kind of a question, right? So yeah, if the name, and you might be groaning on this call, if you work for, gosh, any of the big ERP systems or many databases, you reverse engineer that database and you get the technical metadata, and it looks something like this. You get string 1, string 2, text 123, DT1, right? Yes, that's metadata. Is it helpful in a business sense? Maybe not. Could someone who have created this table made it more intuitive metadata? Is that where a data catalog comes in? That maybe it's okay that this is the technical name of the table, but on the logical or business side, we translate it, right? All that nerdy nitty-gritty stuff is really how, when we think about metadata management, what we need to think through. Because really metadata asks that context and definition, and be careful, because I could go on for example and then I really do sound nerdy. But I always say, even the consultants on my team, it's like when you have the wrong example, you sound crazy. When you have the right example, you sound brilliant. And that's when we go into our clients. If you get that right example of, I don't know, you could do it with people in your company too. Like, oh my gosh, yeah, that purchase order date. And they're like, oh my gosh, you're right, purchase order date. And they'll go on for three hours. If you get the wrong one, they're like, why on earth? Like, why wouldn't we know what city means, right? And so again, it's that for example. But all of these, almost any column, and I've been around long enough, I've seen it all, that you could say, gosh, really, how hard is it that it's somebody's last name? Well, last name in the Western world makes sense, but not every culture. The last name is your family name or surname. And do you call it family name? Do you call it surname? Do you call it, right? What if someone has, in Latin America, you may have several last names, and do you put that in the middle name field or the first name field? And gosh, you have 3 customers right now where just what is someone's first name and family name, and do they use a preferred name, right? That's the whole master data management, metadata management project, right? So something like city, I already brought that up. What about that city, right? Is that where the person lives, where they bought the thing, where the product was sourced from? We don't know. And so that's part of the issue. And then the good old formatting, is it varchar 30? Is it last, how do we abbreviate? What is the formal abbreviation of last name, so you don't have to or you probably can't in the database system, spell it out with spaces and all of that. So all of that is super important, and all of it is super important at the business level. And again, I've been around long enough. I'll tell you my metadata stories, right? Like, I mean, there was one, we worked for a client. I still don't understand this. The data engineer, database administrator, shortened the product code field from like character 20 to character 10. I don't know if you're trying to space base or whatever, but it brought down the company's website for like 3 days, losing millions. This was a major named company that I will not name, brought down their website for 3 days, and they lost millions of dollars over metadata, right? Over the length of a technical field, right? Because there were no metadata standards. If you ask me, shouldn't have needed standards to kind of not have shortened a key field like that. But again, that was a metadata type thing that happened. So, I do get pushback from metadata, and I'll have to say that I may offend some people on the call, but often it's the IT folks saying, gosh, that's just too hard. Why do we need it? I very rarely hear the business saying we need less metadata, or maybe it's just human nature. I want someone else to have created the metadata. It's really helpful. Creating it myself is kind of a pain, right? And from a little dated now, but I still think it's true, a DATAVERSITY survey we did a while back, that 80% of the users of metadata are from the business. I want to do self-service. I probably want both the business and technical data, metadata of where this was from. What does it mean? And it really helps clarify the rules of the business. And again, if you're new to this, I remember when I was at my first DATAVERSITY type conferences, and someone would say something like that, like, oh yeah, I got a single definition for customer, or a single definition of total sales. Ha ha ha. I'm like, how hard is that? What am I missing? Yeah, total sales, right? The more you're in the business, gosh, there's probably 6 different definitions of total sales across the organization, and how is that calculated is kind of important, right? I could be making business decisions on that. I could be having to report to the street. If I'm a publicly traded company, I could have to go to the board and, or I have three different definitions of total sales and I'm going to the board and I've lost my trust because I couldn't explain why it was calculated, or they think I'm faking the numbers or something, right? It's pretty darn important. And that's metadata, right? Um, and again, we can either sound brilliant or crazy, depending how we present this to if we're a data architect or a metadata engineer or data governance person. Again, pick the right example, but we should be thinking of all these things in our head. Whether we verbalize it, a story of my life. Do I verbalize the thing in my head or do I keep it to myself? But you should have these things in your head, right? Someone says, show me all the customers by region. And I could see the business person saying, really? And you can even see from his body language, like, dude, how hard is that? Can I have it by noon? Like, this is not a hard thing. And you're like, well, what do we mean by customer? Is it current customers? What if they've lapsed? How do you define a region? Is it a sales region, a geographical region? If I have a billing address in more than one region, I mean, I'm a company that's headquartered in New York, but my subsidiaries in Europe, and which region are they in, and do you really want to know the people's name on the, what do you mean by customer? If it's a I'm selling, B2C, do I put the person's name? Or are you going to get in trouble if I show the actual customer list? And can I share that from Europe to the US? Right? There's a lot, right? You may not overwhelm the guy on the left there and say all of that to him, but you may have to say a little bit to him, or even better, that's already been defined, and you click the button and say, here you go, sir. Here's a list of all customers by regions, and here's some things to think about. It includes these types of customers, kind of the footnotes, right? So when he does have to, I mean, we had a couple customers. There was one, he was kind of ornery, right? And he was very high up in the organization, and he kind of thought we were all crazy. We were the people on the right asking him all these questions. And then he came back and he's like, you know what, folks? And I credit him for saying this. He goes, I just was interviewed by CNN and they were talking about the stuff we published. And all that stuff you were saying, like, what do we mean by the region and how do we calculate this? I had that at my fingertips and they were asking me and I looked really smart. So thank you. I now know what you mean, right? Because it was a big organization and people were looking at these numbers and they had questions, right? And he was able to answer them. And again, to be careful for us in tech, he's like, when you guys were talking data catalog, it didn't make sense to me. Um, when I had an example where someone was throwing these questions at me, it made total sense. So I think that's the burden on us a little bit as technical people to explain things in a better way, which is why I went on my little Donna rant about please don't use metadata where you don't need to, because we alienate people where it's absolutely crucial to what they do. It's not tangential to what they do or whatever. So, and if you are one of those folks, which is most people in the organization, who are tasked, if you're a data steward or you're a data owner or you're a technical person, when people ask you to document this, and I know sometimes it does feel silly, like, gosh, really? I am building this big system and you need to have me define what a part number is? Like, seriously, it's the number of a part. And please don't create definitions like that. Right? That's kind of a, what is Bob Siner calls that, a burger definition, a cheeseburger is a burger with cheese. That doesn't help, right? Because there probably is nuance. And again, I've been around the block enough that almost every word I've ever seen has 6 different definitions at one particular client. So it could just be like, oh, right, part number, we used to call that component number before the acquisition. This guy knows because he's been with the company for 35 years. That's not so obvious to everybody else. And is a component the same as a part? Any folks in manufacturing, is a product, is a, do we sell subcomponents? Can you only sell the full part? Again, this is like big projects I've done with major corporations where something as simple as what's a product versus a component versus a part versus it's kind of a big deal, right? So it seems simple. It's almost like the core things of your business that seem so simple, even more define it because it might not be simple for somebody else, right? So to add some of that context is really, really helpful and share it with others because it really helps with that collaboration. So who might use metadata? Probably everybody. It could just be like I just said, I'm someone in finance. What's the definition of regional sales? Kind of important if I'm making decisions on it. Or, from the data architect, I spent a lot of time so far on the business side of things, but technically too, what is the approved data structure for storing customer data? These are the approved fields. Here's that data type length. Um, Gosh, I mean, all of these, even just this week, I've had these questions. Do we store, I don't know, employee number as a number or a varchar because does it have letters in it or not? Like, if someone's already figured that out, can we share those data structures and make them consistent so that the new developers are all building new systems with the same data structure and we don't reinvent the wheel each time, right? Or we already talked about total sales, regional sales. Your auditor might care, right? And when we talk about lineage or, show me the numbers, show me how you calculated that figure is kind of important. And metadata is that. Again, back to kind of the flip side of that from the data architecture, how did we do literally, so you can say in general how total sales was calculated and it came from these systems and these business transformations were done on it, but down to the literal what field it came from the ERP system and this field in the ERP system, and then it was transformed here into the landing and staging and into the warehouse. Super important. And if you have a data catalog and you click that magic button and can see that lineage, that's all sourced from that question the data warehouse person's asking. Some person defined that mapping. It's not magic, right? So making that explicit. The one I don't see enough, and I will cease my stories or we'll never end this webinar. Well, I'll tone down my stories. I can't promise to cease them. But if I change this field, what else will be affected? Proactive metadata management, not just always reactive, what happened or how it was done. Again, here goes my story. But here, that data engineer that shortened the part number field, had he done a quick where used analysis of this field is used to keep the website up and it's used here, there, and there, and it requires a bigger length, it would have not caused a bad problem, right? This one I think we don't stress enough, especially when we think of things like glossaries, right? Which is the business definitions for a lot of these terms published in a catalog metadata repository. New people coming up to speed. I know, my company, we're consultants, and we love it when a company has a glossary because what do you do when you learn a new company? It's the lingo. Or if you're in a new industry, you're changing jobs and you don't know what every company does, partly to have a little bit of a, to be honest, a little bit of a moat that people don't know what they're talking about with these acronyms or terms and how it means at this company. It's a great place for new hires to get up to speed in the lingo of your organization. So, if you're not convinced, I just always have to put in my metadata cartoons. But this is one from one of my data modeling books, which is, okay, we're all done with testing and everything looks great with this new marketing application. Just small question, what do we mean by a customer? And that may not be funny to you because maybe it's just not a funny cartoon, but it is just, gosh, how many projects I've been on where the nuance of what we mean by a customer, is it gosh, we're with one, and I won't mention the names, especially when there's a problem, but a multinational corporation, you will know, and we're trying to do a big digital transformation, and the core question is, what is a customer? Is it an individual? Is it an internal customer? Is it a company? Are there subsidiaries of the company? Is it retail? Is it wholesale? All of that is messing them up from doing basic business operations because they can't come to that basic agreement, right? So super important to get upfront. And if not upfront, you'll be doing it down the road. If you're not convinced, another not great example, very sad example. And before I kind of, what do you call it, slander NASA, they're actually very good now. If you go to look some of the open website data, they actually have some really good metadata. But in the day, one of the big stories we've heard, you may have heard it yourself. In 1999, it was the Mars Climate Orbiter. They sent for a journey to Mars, and there was a basic data type question of when I'm looking at the thruster data I'm not a Mars Climate Orbiter expert, right? But the thruster to make the spacecraft go, right? Was it in English units or metric units, pound seconds or Newton seconds? And they had it wrong. And so they missed their mark. And so not only did they lose $125 million spacecraft, which is expensive now, it was even more expensive back in the day. Well, it wasn't great, visibility, negative visibility, because I'm talking about it now. So reputational damage, but also, if the nerd in me, lost opportunities. We could have learned a whole lot about Mars and we didn't. So that's a huge example that was in the press. We've got smaller examples that weren't in the press, like the guy shortening the product field, but a lot of problems we have are metadata problems, right? So how do we kind of solve that? Just one other example. I've used this before, but I created this picture because I was doing a training webinar on self-service BI and the tools, and I was all set to say how cool it was and how far the tools have come and what you could do with open data sets, and you can download it and be a magician with these tools. And I picked an example of vehicle road safety issues by make and model of cars from a company in the UK, which ironically enough, we're working on to help fix their data now, which has kind of come full circle. But anyway, and I thought, well, that could be kind of fun. The Porsche drivers can compete with the, Mercedes drivers and see who has the worst, vehicle, whatever. But I couldn't because this is what I got. I got, that F13 is really big and 20150 by 3C4 is 10. I have no idea what this data means. And the make and model F2 is 2015. That's probably a date. It's not formatted like a date, right? It didn't say date anywhere, right? So someone did a whole lot of work and actually did extra work to publish this in open data sets, but there's no metadata. So it's absolutely useless, right? And so it's kind of an extreme example, but this is what you risk when you don't really have good definitions. And I can see it. Someone out there is probably like, oh, seriously? I have to document that F13 is the vehicle make and model? Well, yeah, because otherwise, how do you know what it is, right? Um, I'm going to give it all the, I told you I wasn't going to tell my stories, but this is filled with stories. But maybe some of these will help you, right? Something as simple as what is a year? Gosh, I see this a lot. Is it fiscal year? Is it calendar year? Is it whatever, right? And so this was a company, and a global company, and they were looking at kind of sales. And when they looked, they were looking at sales globally. And when they looked at Latin America, it was really low in November and December, which is usually their biggest months, right? Or fourth quarter, to be more clear. Fourth quarter sales were low, and they thought that was really weird. That's usually our biggest month. Everybody else in November and December has their biggest spike. So they were actually going to do a whole new marketing campaign. And did we have to drop our Latin America subsidiary? Like they just can't keep up. This is terrible, big deal. And it came down to what do we mean by a year? Fiscal year is different than calendar year. And Latin America was on the fiscal year, right? So when they're talking about fourth quarter sales, the fourth quarter sales, meaning calendar year and Latin America, were actually fine. And when they matched them correctly, they were fine, right? So here's yet another real world example of, gosh, they were going to even drop a region for not performing over a simple definition for what is a year, right? And again, use your examples widely. If this isn't a problem and you go to your manager, be like, Mary, what's a year? She's going to think you're crazy. So you put it in context and it all makes sense, right? Um, and one of the beautiful things I can talk today of metadata is that it does provide that audit and traceability. Not only we know how sales was calculated, what we mean by all the dimensions of sales, year and region and all of that, but we're able to show that traceability through metadata on the technical side through how it was calculated. Great for auditors, great for making decisions, all of that. So I think that's what people expect. I think we've been lax in the industry. I remember once we were trying to convince a finance organization to fund our big metadata initiative. And we were talking to the head of finance and we're saying, and we could actually, when you have a number, we can show you how it's calculated and how it came from. No, remember, this is finance, right? What do they do for a living? Audit and numbers. And she looked at us in horror and just said, you mean you don't do that today? That's really scary. And she's right that what we're creating these reports, but we can't tell you what it means and how it's calculated. When you say it that way, we do kind of sound ridiculous as an industry. So we shouldn't even have to ask permission for this. We should just be doing it, was kind of her statement there, right? And I know you're probably rolling your eyes, yeah, but we need budget for it. But we also have to do it, right? There's a bit of both. This should be part of our typical way of working. So you might also be saying, okay, that's great, Donna. That's business intelligence. No one does that anymore. Everything's AI. I don't think you're saying that. It's both and, right? But what does metadata mean in the world of AI? Do we not need it anymore? Do we need it even more? So here we go. Let's go through some examples. No surprise, we need even more. I'll give away my end. But let's go through an example. I'm a big skeptic, and AI is pretty darn amazing right now. It's also pretty scary, and there's a lot of hype, right? So let's kind of break that down. There's different ways to do AI, and this isn't a course on AI, but we'll kind of go through. So a typical, when you look at, say, Wall Street and a lot of the companies that are looking to do AI, a lot of it has to do with this workforce automation, or how do we automate repetitive simple tasks, not only through code, which you've been doing forever, but through AI. And so kind of your traditional analytical AI, which to be fair, we've been doing for a long time, could be your predictive analytics. I know it's enhanced nowadays, but we're looking at information from different sources, the inventory, sales, and supplier, and we're going to detect proactively that there's an inventory shortage in a given region, and we can do a report to management for that. Even better with AI, we can do this generative AI, and it's more than just creating selfies of yourself aged 20 years or whatever it is. I know there's a lot of fun things to do with generative AI, and I'm guilty of doing some of that myself when I'm bored on the weekend, but it can also has business purposes, right? So you can use the results from your analytical AI to draft an email to the supplier with the part number you need and the delivery date, and heck, do a purchase order while you're at it, right? So based on the results of analytical AI, I know I need this much inventory, heck, let's draft an email, request the part number, and then with agentic AI, which is actually taking action on it. Hey, we can even add to that analytical AI and check the weather patterns. And are there going to be any delays in the inventory? And it can do these things on its own by kind of, reasoning in a way. And then it could send an email to the supplier. It could access that ERP system directly, generate a purchase order, update the inventory management system. All wonderful and pretty if that all works correctly. So, aside from any issues in AI or the models of AI, which are not transparent, like the example I showed for the financial measures, which when we're looking at use cases for AI, that lineage is pretty darn important. If you're denying me a loan on AI and you can't show why, or you're saying here's your sales figures, you say why, I'm like, well, I don't know. I asked ChatGPT and they said that's what my revenue this year was, right? I'm not saying anyone here would do that, but right, you can't show that lineage, right? However, that's the beauty of this, is that it can be sort of self-perpetuating self, um, being more agentic, right? I heard a webinar a few weeks ago, and I thought the way the presenter said it was really great. It was, AI is just math on top of data, right? Which is true. And if your data isn't good, your AI is going to be actually dangerous, right? So let's go through this, and I already gave away my answer here, which is metadata is even more important than ever with AI. And I want to show this too, because I've actually argued with um, execs that might not see this or have seen the hype, like, well, gosh, we don't have to do all that data quality and governance now with AI. It just knows. I know we think that just sounds as silly as it is. It doesn't just know, it knows off the data you provide it, right? So let's go back to the things I've made a career out of, right? What do we mean by region when if inventory shortage in a given region? And again, we're working with just 3 customers right now. Where is it the sales region? Is it a geographic region? And even if it's a geographic region, that isn't necessarily like it is Mexico and Latin America or North America. Depending on the company, I've seen it both ways. Well, how do we do it here? So if I'm saying sales by the Americas, what does that include? Or, what is Europe and EMEA the same thing? Are we including Africa? Right. So, gosh, the number of issues, or is it is it financial region, or is it region within our internal group? Right. Just something as simple as what is a region is going to throw off your model. Is our supplier data consistent? I mean, Shannon and I were kind of talking before the break of, what are we seeing in our businesses? Is AI driving, more demand? And I'm like, well, the same things we've been doing all along. If you can't know your suppliers and what is the address data on your suppliers, are they stored in different fields and different systems? How do we identify a supplier? By the DUNS number in one system, by the tax ID in another? Gosh, so many clients in the past few years, even just I've seen you have duplicate suppliers because they have different addresses, and the ERP system does it in a way that we just create a new supplier for each address. That's going to really mess up your model when you're trying to do sales by supplier. Or, are the supplier names, gosh, we've been doing some data profiling, and there was one client, and it is true. I still, every time I say it, I'm surprised that it was true. They had like 78 different spellings of the word AT&T. American Telegraph and Telephone, AT&T with an ampersand with an you can probably imagine. So it's really hard for an AI. Yes, there's some things AI can do to kind of, go across those and see. But if your supplier data is not consistent, or it's just wrong, or it's not up to date, or your systems are storing it in vastly different ways, it's not going to be great input into your models. Or, back to, our dates consistent? What do we even mean by a date, right? The weather data is from Europe, the request was from Argentina, the suppliers from the US. Is 1/9 the beginning of January, or the first, beginning of September? And then depending on the region, is this summer or winter? Right? We could do it. How does AI know which one we're gonna pick. And it can, right? Or it's even something as simple as just request date and delivery date mean the same thing, right? So these questions, some could be perhaps sleuthed out with AI, but the majority of them, AI is based on these things. So if you're giving it things that are inconsistent or just wrong, it could, make a decision on this is a winter shortage, but we're in Argentina and it's summertime right now, or whatever, right? You need to have that context with your AI model to make it right. So yes, with AI, we need metadata even more. The other part of AI or just life as a data person, and what is both stressful or really, really fun, depending on the day and your mood, right? And why actually it keeps me in the business is just things change so fast, right? And metadata, I gave the example of a data, kind of a relational database and a spreadsheet, but oh, were it that easy, right? There's so many different ways from um, social media data to Internet of Things streaming data to documents now to video files to, a lot of the cool AI you see, the generative stuff is on videos and pictures and things like that, which is very, very different from what's in a database, right? So I think we have to go beyond our traditional meaning of metadata and add to it, right? So what are some of these sources? A bit of a plug, I do have a metadata course with DATAVERSITY. I think Shannon often kind of includes that in the link. Can we go like in way nerdier detail on all of these, but we'll do a couple highlights just to kind of get the idea because it could get boring really quickly, or maybe it already is boring. Just go through some examples. And you're like, okay, Donna, you're talking about modern metadata and AI and all that, and you brought up a COBOL copybook, and some of you on the call might be, a what? What's that? I know when I was early in my career, which was a long time ago, it was old then, but I had to learn COBOL copybooks because they are still out there and they're still running a lot of financial institutions. And I mentioned Dataversity, and we do a survey each year, and one of the years COBOL was actually increasing, right? Because you need to understand these systems, and what better way to understand a system you don't know is through the metadata, right? So not saying you have to do all this by hand. A lot of these data catalogs or even modeling tools can parse through this and read it for you, but you need a tool that can do that, right? Because they're not going away yet. When we've been saying that for dozens of years now that this stuff is going away, but we can mock it, but guess it's still running, right? So, but again, one of the beautiful things of metadata, especially with technologies that can parse it for you, is that it helps understand stuff that, gosh, I remember having to learn these, but if you went back now and made me read one, I'd need some help, right? So that's what a lot of these data catalog tools do. Image metadata, I mentioned, especially with things like generative AI, and this goes back to the story of my friend that was using the word metadata. Um, that you can learn a lot from a picture, and if you don't know this, maybe you should, because people can track things about your photos. Right, when you think of data privacy and things like that, when was it taken? So my friend was using it to see what kind of exposures and flash and things like that. You can also see when it was taken, at what time, things like that. So there's a lot that you can both have inherently in the picture, or then with things like vector databases and things like that, you can add, we all love it when you're trying to log into a website and do something, and they're like, how many of these pictures has a lamppost in it? And if you're like me, I'm clearly not human because I always get them wrong. What is a lamppost, right? That's metadata in of itself, but you're helping train their models for them. And that's the kind of user added, is that thing in the upper right a tree? What kind of tree? How do I know that it's a tree, right? So all that kind of stuff is metadata. You can also add that with social media. I posted this on Twix. I've never done that before. Twitter and X, the combination. Right, there's some embedded in the picture, but then you can add what are people saying about this picture? Wow, everyone was at EDW in San Diego, and it was gorgeous, and we have 40,000 tweets about it. That's metadata, right? That you can do all of that. I'm going pretty fast because they're just examples. That isn't a training on any of these, but NoSQL document databases, right? They have their own kind of metadata, which makes them very powerful, right? What type of data is this? What are the titles, countries? I mean, this could be a JSON file. Like most databases have some sort of, and not all, some of the NoSQL don't, like key value pairs, have some sort of structural metadata, like how is it stored, and then semantic data, which is what it means. And that really is kind of the summary of metadata. It's both of those together, right? Um, vector databases I mentioned, right? And I've admitted to being a geek about this. It's actually kind of amazing. Go to ChatGPT and say something like, find me a picture of a frog, or generate me a picture of a green frog on a bicycle, or find me one, right? That vector databases are really good at that. You can convert these images into numerical vectors in your database, but then add that semantic meaning so that I know that this picture that I can now parse out is a green frog and that's a bicycle. And then I want to search on that. So I would say that's fairly new. A lot of these technologies, I learned about in university way back, but we haven't actualized them with, these new data storage capabilities and data centers. And, there's a lot more data out there. And we're able to actualize a lot of the stuff that used to be just theoretical. So it's another example of metadata. And so those were just a few. I mean, in the course I give, I think there's a whole module on that because full disclosure, kind of nerded out about it. It's like, what's this? What would be the metadata from this? What would be the metadata from this? So you may want to think of that yourself. I'm working with data source A, and one of the things I always like to say is, we keep talking about unstructured data. Well, most data has some sort of structure. It's how you parse it out. A document has structure or you couldn't read it. That's what LLMs look at, right? So, but it's not structured in the database column way we typically think about it. So how do we manage metadata in the org? There's no one size fits all. So I'm showing you some patterns. Larger organizations that, because metadata is so hot and governance is so hot right now, typically invest in some sort of metadata repository or data catalog, what they're often called now. And what that has, when you think about it, it's kind of like a data warehouse for metadata. It has its own, gosh, if we're talking about nerdy words, something like a meta model, right? Which is all those things I just showed you as example. How does it know to parse out a COBOL copybook and know that this is, equivalent to a field in a database table, and that the tables have tables and columns in a copybook, and I forget what they're called, right? Someone could probably correct me on this call, right? But it has all that, so it knows what to parse out. It can have some reuse logic to say, here's all the stuff related to customer. It can, those automated population interfaces I talked to, they feel like magic. It's really nice. Great. I'm a data engineer and someone just handed me a DB2 database that no one's touched in 42 years. I press a button and now I see the data structure. Pretty darn cool, right? It can automate a lot of lineage if some of that lineage is inherent in the data and things like that. Super powerful. Also, and some way to publish that out for folks, either through web portals, or a lot of the more modern tools can even integrate with things like Slack or whatever you're using, right? Powerful, however expensive, right? And my early career was building these as a vendor, implementing them as a data engineer, like sales engineer, and going all over the world doing metadata repositories. Having done that, I will also say I saw a lot of companies spend literally millions of dollars on it when they probably could have done some of it, at least to begin with, in a data modeling tool. If you're only using this for tables and columns and you really want to, maybe a data modeling tool with a publication interface is great. Or I'm just starting with the business glossary. Can I do that? I know you guys are probably cringing, some of you, but it's really practical. Can I just do that in SharePoint to start? Because the act of creating a glossary through governance and publishing it out, like there's a lot of work to do with even that methodology. And you'll understand that methodology more before you go buy a tool, because they're all good or they wouldn't be in the market, but they're all really different and how they work is different. So can you either, if your use case is small, just use one of these kind of fit for purpose mini data catalogs or embedded in a tool, either before you buy the big tool or always. It really depends. This could be a whole webinar and it's not, but this idea of metadata exchange across industries, medical, if you're doing medical sharing it's funny because I talk to a lot of technical people, and a lot of us will even push back on this idea of metadata, and it's hard and all that. And then I'll talk to businesses that I've never talked before, and they're talking about metadata exchange and information sharing patterns and things. And just like my friend who was the photographer, I kind of get a little excited and freak them out and be like, well, gosh, how did you come up with that standard and why? And they just look at me like, again, like a lady in finance, like I'm crazy, and say, well, how else would we share information across, we're doing global research if we don't know what a patient is and we're all staring at it in different ways. I'm like, well, you're exactly right. But a lot of people don't do that. And they're like, okay, whatever, weirdo, of course we're doing that. So, or you're doing EDI even, right? You're doing, I need to share health data information or supplier information, right? A lot of this we've been doing for a long time, and it just becomes kind of like obvious because it's working, right? So all the above plus some, but some things to think of. One way I like to think of it as you're looking at tools, again, there's a lot of good ones out there, but either within the tool or helping you choose a tool or how you design your metadata management approach, I like to say there's the encyclopedia and the Wikipedia approach. So, if and it could be both, depending on the type of data in your org, right? I'm doing something like total sales by region, and that's going to go in our annual report published out to the whole world. That should be vetted. It should be locked down, right? And there should be probably a whole metadata management process that, yeah, you can request a change, but if you request a change, it goes through the committee and then they approve it. And then, right. And yeah, that's a little slower, but a lot of things we want to be slow. Like, I don't want my surgeon rushing my heart surgery, right? Like these things should be, governed. Although, I've also seen I'm doing some self-service, just exploratory analytics, or I'm doing social media patterns. Like you don't want to totally slow down that with over governance. And sometimes the act of doing that is generating metadata, if that makes sense. So you want that conversation of, hey, what source do you use? And oh no, this definition is more closely aligned to us. And what do you think? And it's kind of that eventual consistency with a bunch of inputs, right? And I've seen both work and not work. We work with a big multinational bank where they bought a tool that was all like the one on the right. We actually had to argue with the vendors, like, yeah, not everybody gets a voice in how we calculate total sales globally. Yeah, but but it was great for their exploratory analytics team. And similarly, if you lock so many things down, people won't use it because that kind of collaborative approach can really be helpful. So think of what you're going to use and for which data sets. And as with everything, it's a balance. I typically see them kind of working well together, that both collaborative approach and more standards-based approach. Again, you can't not talk about machine learning, AI, and things, and the vendors love to say this too. Everybody's AI enabled nowadays, and it could be a whole other what do you call it, webinar. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity in metadata for some of these, especially because what is AI and machine learning good at? Detecting patterns, right? And I've seen too many human beings' time wasted of, yeah, let's go through, do a data mapping of every field that has in the US their social security number. You can, and you probably want a human to look at that, but that's a very defined pattern. If you see number, dash number, dash number, that kind of feels like a, social security number pattern, or, word.word@word.com is probably an email, right? And so I think there's a both. You can overdo that and make some silly mistakes. It could be that your part numbers are formatted like an SSN, right? So it's not that a human never looks at it, but I think as everything, it's a balance. I think there's a really great case for pattern detection, and there's also a great case for humans to look at that and make sure it hasn't detected the wrong thing, right? And some things are very unique to your company and you want to predefine. So something to think of as you automate. As you look through, and this is a great slide for reference, I don't have to bore you by reading it through, but I mean, metadata is really a meta version of data. Gosh, I told you it's not starting by not being geeky, but a lot of us are kind of familiar with maybe creating a data strategy where you start with your goals and identify the sources and publish it out and govern it over time. Really, it's similar with metadata. Do we know why we're tracking metadata for what use cases? Do we have a good inventory of the type of metadata we're tracking, how we populate it, how we integrate metadata both within ourselves and across industries? How do we govern it over time? And I actually took out a bunch of content from this presentation because I would never finish. On roles and responsibilities, I think it can be very closely aligned with your data governance. Do the data stewards put things in the repository? Is there a data management team that helps? Who's accountable for these definitions? Who defines the life cycle of these things, et cetera, et cetera. So in summary, metadata is critical, if I haven't convinced you already, of that who, what, where, why, both on the business and technical side of things. And it's really relevant to almost any use case uh, where data is involved. And I would say that's true for both your BI and your AI, right? I mean, all of this stuff are just wrappers on top of data. There's a lot, just like with managing data, there's a lot of different architectural ways to manage metadata. Think through that carefully. And I would say, like anything, start small, test out a few things, because and again, I had a bunch of slides would take out on this, but just your metadata management approach should align with your culture and your way of working, right? There's so many tools out there now. Some are really great for that kind of jive coding approach to metadata where it integrates with Slack, and some are really more locked down that no, we create a workflow to approve a definition and move through. And again, is that a combination or is it an either or, right? And like anything, your metadata should be supporting your wider data strategy. If you feel like you're in this alone and you're doing metadata, look around. I bet there's a lot of folks interested in what you're doing because it really is. And if you haven't made that case, maybe some of the slides in this session might help you of why metadata is so critical to basically anything you're doing with data. So, as I mentioned, this is a series. I hope you can join us next month where we talk about data modeling, which is, again, a version of metadata, but a very specific one, which defines structure and syntax around data. A bit of a blatant plug, global data strategy. We do this a lot, both metadata, governance, architecture, and if you are interested in any support for this, do not hesitate to reach out. We'd be happy to help. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Shannon for any questions.
Thank you so much for the great presentation. It's such an important topic. We've heard it come up a lot in a large group that we had yesterday. And somebody mentioned that another event they were at, it also came up a lot. And if you have questions for Donna, feel free to put it in the Q&A panel and just answer the most commonly asked questions. I will send a follow-up email to all registrants by end of day Monday for this webinar with links to the slides and links to the recording. So diving in here, Donna, I'm an enterprise data architect and leading a change to have data models in place before start coding, but our director app development and solution architecture lead is hardly pushing back, saying that they don't care what the shape of the database is anymore and using a code first approach. I was confused and thinking that I think at an old school. Am I thinking I'm too old school? Is there still value for the data modeling in this cutting edge tech era?
Oh, I'm so sorry. You're still getting that question. Absolutely, yes. It's not. Why do they keep saying that? That's so old-fashioned to know what your data means. Like, no, on the contrary. But I said that in the webinar. It's often IT that pushes back. Why? Because it's extra work, right? But it's the absolute work. A couple things. If you can't beat them, join them. I've done things if they're using kind of an agile approach where can you have just like mini snippets of, tone it down of, um, before every sprint, we just need, are there any new data elements? Can we do a mini model, and kind of do it in chunks? Um, I think sometimes that works, that to make it a little less overwhelming. It's not like you need a full enterprise grade, enterprise wide data model to start. I think the other thing, bringing up some examples of explain to me why it's old fashioned to know what you mean by customer and what the fields are, and is there any PII in that and things like that. I think even better is can you get a business person on your side to kind of push for that of like, folks, no, we need to grow up and do. I would say on the contrary, that most enterprise scale folks have a good sense of what they're, I mean, gosh, this whole company, Bloomberg and things like that are monetizing their data is because they have real Amazon, right? They have really good data structures. So maybe that last one's the most important. The more you can have examples and get some business people on your side to be pushing as well of that doesn't fly, because if you don't have time to do it right, you're gonna do it again. And they're going to be cleaning up that data for decades down the road. So get it right up front. Not old fashioned, you're right. How's that? Makes you feel better.
Yeah, I think so. And there's a couple of attendees who also, typed in some answers who do not disagree. And, data modeling is still very important. So Donna, thank you for sharing insights on the latest data practices. Always great to learn from your expertise. Could you share some of the latest AI tools that help automate metadata collection, giving organizations a foundation to review and refine instead of starting from scratch?
Great question. I think, and this is true across AI in general, I've been doing some courses on AI and deep diving my past weekends on that. I think it's true even with just AI in general. Actual adoption of AI is typically through your trusted partners who who are embedding AI in their existing system. So I am seeing less of people wholesale saying, we don't need your data catalogs anymore. It's more your data catalog vendors or your metadata management vendors or data modeling tool vendors embedding some of these AI features within them. So that's where I would look, like a lot of like that example I gave of pattern detection and things like that. Um, so much of metadata can be automated. I would just say also, I think, like any bandwagon folks might have gone a little too far. It doesn't mean that humans aren't in the loop at all. It just takes out the heavy lifting. So my answer is it's probably the vendors you're familiar with that are starting to embed these features in their tool. There are some open source, and I know we have a few government clients kind of exploring some of those options, but most of the larger enterprise clients with budget are kind of going with some of their traditional vendors who are embedding, or there are a lot more in the data catalog world of a more I don't want to say modern because it just feels like that's like derogatory, but maybe a more flexible approach that have both AI and more collaboration in them. So I would look in kind of the still in your metadata world, and then look for the features they've embedded.
Thank you. So, lots of great questions coming in. We got about 5 minutes left. We got some time to dig in. So, Donna, how to convey the best practices to capture and maintain business metadata is within the business domain data models, CDM, LDM.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that question. Could you say it again?
Yeah, sure. I don't know that I read it well. How do you convey the best practices to capture and maintain business metadata within the business domain data model, CDM or LDM?
Okay, glad both, and I think the CDM in particular, the goal of the CDM is to get these high-level business definitions. What I love about the CDM, um, or conceptual data model or high-level business data model, is that it's a glossary is great, but the conceptual data model actually shows the relationship, so it's like a glossary on steroids. So I'm a huge fan of doing that. I think. I often do them collaboratively, even whiteboarding with the business users. So hugely important. When I say, what do we mean by a customer? Gosh, I'm doing one right now and we started with a CDM. Do they have subtypes? Is a customer a company, or is it an individual? Is it a subsidiary? It's a really great way to show that. A lot of the data modeling tools can show the definition view on the data model itself. That's where I mean like a glossary on steroids. When you're getting down to the logical, it should start with those conceptual terms, but then into the different levels of detail. Maybe the conceptual just has product. Down at the logical, you gotta have your product, your component, your physical, finished goods, things like that with more detail, but both are super important. And then a lot of the data modeling tool vendors can put a catalog, they can suck the data out into a catalog, or other catalog vendors can ingest from a data model. So it's a both and, not an either or when you're thinking kind of data catalog and data model. But I'm a huge fan of data modeling, and a plug for next month where we'll go deeper into CDMs and LDMs and all that.
So Donna, how do knowledge graphs play into all of this? What knowledge graphs do you recommend?
Ooh, that was another slide I took out. Big fan of knowledge graphs, graph databases. I think what's nice about them is, and I won't recommend specifically vendors or technologies, but I mean, they're that kind of semantic linkage where I think you'd still need your good nodes, the nouns, which are the strong metadata and cleansed data, but it embeds, semantic meaning in those relationships. So huge fan of them. I guess it's probably a whole webinar. So I won't recommend a vendor, but I think when we're thinking of capturing the benefits of some metadata, I'm probably kicking myself, I took those slides out, but the relationships between metadata our data too. And so super important when you're starting to talk about that kind of knowledge graph type approach.
Nice. And I think we have time to slip in one more question here. In your experience, what have you seen going horribly wrong as a result of not capturing sufficient metadata?
Oh gosh, I said I'd hold back on my stories. I think I shared a few. The website being down based on, bad physical metadata. Well, I'll share one because of that I haven't shared already. And the irony, when I was working for a vendor unnamed who did metadata management, and they sent out renewal notices to their software to customers. They just looked at the database name called customer, and a lot of it was their prospects, people who had never bought their product, and they're getting time to renew. It's that time of year, and they just looked like idiots because it was back to that, what is the definition of customer? And the irony was that that's what they did for a living, was metadata management. But yeah, I think there's so many, and I gave a bunch, the Mars space rover, the people bringing the website down, and I think although the technical metadata can be a challenge, I think more so it's that semantic or the business metadata. What do we mean by? And I think starting any project with that, what do we just checking? We're going to do a product. Are we talking about finished goods? We talking about components, wholesale, retail, and doing that in the right way can really generate some good discussion.
Perfect. Then that brings us right to the top of the hour. So many great questions, and I'm afraid that is all the time that we have for this. Thanks to you, Donna, for another fantastic presentation. Really appreciate it. And thanks to all our attendees for being so engaged in everything we do. Just again, a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Monday with links to the slides and links to the recording. Hope you all have a great day. Thank you, Donna.
Thanks, everyone.